Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Darnell Hunt, the Political Action Committee Chair of the Johnson County NAACP. I want to welcome everyone to the Johnson County District Attorney's Virtual Candidates Forum. And I want to thank you for making an effort to get to know who your candidates for this district attorney race are. Your being here today is what makes democracy work. It is about being an informed voter. We only have 24 days until the November 3rd general election. The district attorney is dubbed the top cop because he or she represents the government against criminal offenders in court. They review police reports, determine whether criminal charges are to be brought against perpetrators, and argue criminal cases. This position has far-reaching power and authorities, but is one of the most often ignored in the political arena. The two candidates before us today are the current County District Attorney, Steve Howe, and the challenger, criminal lawyer, Zach Thomas. They will both introduce themselves shortly. Our moderator for this afternoon is Vanessa Vaughn-West. She is currently the director of diversity and inclusion at Lathrop Gage Law Firm. She was formerly the community relations manager for the city of Olathe. I used to work with her when I had a stint as the Olathe Human Relations Commission. Vanessa has nearly 20 years experience in the roles, focusing on diversity and inclusion, corporate social responsibility, community relations, and communication. Without further ado, I will turn it over to our moderator for this afternoon, Vanessa Vaughn-West.
Thank you so much, Darnell, and thank you to the NAACP and all of the partners that have come together to make this event possible. And of course, thank you to our participants. Before we get started, I wanted to begin by sharing some of the rules of engagement today. As most of you all know, this is one of many forums that the NAACP and partners have hosted throughout this election season, and we're happy to be back offering this forum for you all today. Today's forum is in a question and answer format. I will read each question, and then each of our candidates will have up to 2 minutes to respond. We do have a timekeeper who will indicate when time is getting down to the wire, and we anticipate and expect that everyone will be respectful and mindful of the limitations for our answer responses today. The order in which our candidates will answer the questions will alternate for each question. And the questions have been provided by our sponsoring partners who have contributed to this event. We'll also be taking questions from the audience, which can be submitted by emailing virtualdaforumevent@gmail.com. If you look at the heading under my photo today, you will see this email address printed there. Feel free to use it at any time. The questions that we'll be exploring today are about issues that are important to the constituents of Johnson County. They are going to be the issues and the deciding factors that help us to determine who will be elected into this office. For the candidates, as a reminder, I want you to remember to mute and unmute yourselves as is appropriate today when you're answering and not answering questions. And that for everyone, this event is being recorded. So for those who are able to watch it live or may want to revisit it or share it with those who are unable to be with us today, you'll have that opportunity by going out to the Climate Council's YouTube channel, and it will be stored there for future viewing. So at this time, I'm going to thank a few of our sponsors, and then we'll jump right into the questions. So of course, our presenting sponsor today is the Johnson County NAACP. We are also joined by the Johnson County Latina Leadership Network, Olathe Second Baptist Church, Shawnee Mission Unitarian Universalist Church, Omega Psi Phi, the Miller Dance Team, Advocacy and Awareness Groups of Overland Park, Move On, More Squared of Johnson County, the Johnson County United Organization, Upsilon Rho Omega Chapter of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and last but not least, the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City. So gentlemen, thank you for being here with us today. And as we get started, I wanted to just begin by inviting you all to give your elevator speech of what it is, what is the role of district attorney? We heard Darnell share with us about some of the responsibilities and duties that the person in this role has, but I want to offer it up to both of you. If you were in an elevator and only had 2 minutes to explain this role of district attorney, what would you say? Mr. Howe, I'll turn it over to you first.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and provide this forum for a discussion about a very important office, as you indicated, as district attorney. I bring 30 years of experience to the table, both as an assistant district attorney and 12 years as your DA. And it's an important job that really impacts the day in and day out activities of our community and people's lives. The district attorney is really the chief prosecutor in the state, in the county, but also he is the chief law enforcement officer for the county. And that means that in addition to the day in and day out activities in our courtroom, it's part of my responsibility to lead the other criminal justice agencies in our county towards initiatives and goals to make it a better criminal justice system. And we are blessed in Johnson County to have a great set of organizations and law enforcement agencies that all work together towards the common goal. We want a safe community, and we want an opportunity to be fair and just in the manner in which we bring about the criminal justice system. And with our Criminal Justice Advisory Council, which is a council that's been in place for decades, it has been instrumental in us really being innovators and being progressive in addressing needs in the community. And that includes the needs of our minority populations here in Johnson County. And we've been very active in examining ourselves. And one thing that I really like about Johnson County, both my office and other agencies, is we don't think that we have all the answers. And so we work as a team to come up with solutions to problems that exist in our county. And so while we have to get the job done in the courtroom and keep our community safe, it's also important to be proactive in providing opportunities to reduce recidivism through initiatives and programs. And I'm hoping to have an opportunity throughout this debate to talk about some of the great things that we've done over the last 12 years. So those are the responsibilities and duties of the district attorney. And I see I'm out of time, so I'll end my discussion.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Thomas, what's your elevator speech? How would you explain your role, the role of district attorney?
Thank you very much. Thank you to the NAACP and the whole host of sponsors for inviting myself and Mr. Howe out here to talk to you all. I truly appreciate the fact that you are interested in learning more about what this position is. In my mind, what does the district attorney do? Well, there's 3 simple things. The first is prosecute. Prosecute any case brought forth by law enforcement agencies in the county. The second is protect. Protect the rights of defendants guaranteed in the Constitution, as well as protecting the victims. The third is prevent. Prevent future crimes. Implement policies and programs that are geared to working with law enforcement agencies and other agencies in the community to prevent future crimes so that we can have a safer Johnson County. Well, I'm Zach Thomas. I'm running to be your next Johnson County District Attorney because I've seen what's going on in the county. I've seen us falling behind. Violent crime has increased drastically over the last 4 years. Trial success rate and holding people accountable has fallen drastically over the last 8 years. Inequities exist in the system today, and we need to address those inequities and face them head on. We have to admit that there are racial inequities. We have to admit that there are gender issues in the office. And only once we admit those issues exist, can we move forward. I am very proud to say that I am the son of Indian immigrants. My parents left their home, gave up everything to start anew so that they can offer better for me and my brother. I am the first person of color to run for this office. I am the only candidate endorsed by a minority association. I am endorsed by the Asian American Bar Association. I am very proud to have that burden on my shoulder as the first person of color to run for this office. I look forward to not only running, but serving as your next Johnson County District Attorney. I thank you all again.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And I can see that we've got two great attorneys before us today. And one of the hallmarks of a great attorney is to be able to pivot a question, to be able to address multiple aspects. And I know that Mr. Thomas, you used that question a little bit to answer what was going to be my next question, and that is about kind of your candidate opening statement. You know, for the both of you, why is it that you are here today, and why is it that we should vote for you? And so I'll give you some time to follow up with that, since we are alternating between the candidates on who starts their responses. So Mr. Thomas, I'll let you lead on this one. Kind of, if you have additional opening remarks, go ahead and give those to us now.
Well, thank you very much, and sorry for jumping the gun there. I am running, like I said, because I've been a criminal lawyer. I've lived in Johnson County. I've seen what's taking place, what programs are in existence, and what programs are not in existence. I've served as a public defender. I've seen how the effects of criminal charging over and over again on the same individuals affects not only the individual, but the families and friends of that individual, but more importantly, the community of Johnson County. I'm bringing a breath of perspective, fresh energy to the office. Some will argue, my opponent will say, I have no prosecutorial experience. Mr. Howe and myself are both criminal lawyers. We both have the same education. We both have the same courtroom training. Every case I take, I analyze from a prosecutor perspective. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm a successful trial lawyer. And I attribute my ability to know what the prosecutor is going to do ahead of time to that success. The only difference between Mr. Howe and myself is that I would wager that I've tried more cases over the last 12 years than Mr. Howe. I've been in the courtroom far more than Mr. Howe. I'm bringing transparency and accountability to the office because I believe that we need to bridge the gap of distrust amongst the community, with law enforcement, and the DA's office. I say that, and that's a pillar of my candidacy, my campaign. And I'd be foolish not to address one issue. The NAACP graciously hosted a law enforcement panel back in June or July earlier this year. During that panel, they posed a question: how many minorities have been killed by law enforcement agencies? I watched as the panel said no. I watched as Mr. Howe did not say a thing. And I was extremely frustrated. In a private chat to the moderator, I said something along the lines of they're lying. Well, my opponent says I called all police chiefs liars. I've tried to go back and look for this information. I've contacted the NAACP. I've contacted the city of Olathe, and I could not find that. I posed the question to Mr. Howe: how many minorities have been killed in Johnson County?
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn the tables to Mr. Howe and give him a chance to respond to my initial question, which was the opportunity to share your opening remarks and reason for being here and why we should vote for you.
Yes. You know, when I first began my career as a prosecutor back in 1988, I took to heart what my father said, which is make sure that you have a passion in whatever job you seek, because that will give you satisfaction in your life and provide you some guidance throughout your life. And when I first became a prosecutor, I immediately knew this was my niche in life, being able to provide a voice to victims and help the community. And so the question is, hey, 30 years later, do you still have that passion, Steve, right? So I'll tell you why I still have that passion. You know, when I walk in on Monday mornings and I see battered and bruised women from domestic violence, that gives me the passion to continue to fight for victims. When I have to sit down with families who have lost loved ones because of violence, that gives me the passion to continue to serve this community. And when I have to sit down with sexual assault victims and provide some guidance to them as they seek peace and justice, that gives me passion to continue to work to provide justice to these victims and safety to the community. And, you know, we do really great work in the courtroom. I have a great trial team. And, you know, when it comes down to the really heavy cases, we have a 97% 97% success rate in a murder and attempted murder cases over my 12 years. Our jury trial rate is 74% over those 12 years. And I've been criticized for maybe losing a case or two by my opponent. But you know what I tell my people? Try the right cases. Try the right cases for victims. And I will never apologize for taking a domestic violence case where the victim is opposed to prosecution because she's terrified to testify against her abuser. Or the DUI case where the 6-time DUI offender won't take a breath test and we have minimal evidence. And we'll lose some of those cases, but it's the right thing to do for the victim and it's the right thing to do for the community. And we have a great system where we have innovative programs. Johnson County has been declared an innovator county in nationally in programs like the lethality assessment, the FAST teams. We have the co-responder program. These are all innovative programs that have really led Johnson County.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. And the next question is really relating to the events of the summer. So as you all know, this summer was a summer of what I often call a racial awakening. There have been many social justice events, national events, as well as local events. In the midst of some of those things, there is an organization that has launched a campaign called 8 Can't Wait. And this campaign offers 8 data-backed policies that they say, if implemented by police departments, would reduce or may reduce police killings by a certain percentage. The 8 proposed policies include banning chokeholds and strangulations, requiring de-escalation, requiring warnings before shootings, requiring officers to exhaust all alternatives before shootings, imposing a duty to intervene. You all are familiar with this, no doubt. So I wanted to list some of those for our audience members. But my question to you, Mr. Howe, is would you support implementing the 8 Can't Wait initiatives throughout Johnson County's public safety agencies as an effort for reforming policing? Please explain why or why not.
And we had that earlier forum with the NAACP that talked about that very issue. And it's my understanding that the vast majority of those initiatives have already been set aside by law enforcement as not a best practice. And I think the one that perhaps there was pushback by law enforcement is warning somebody before shooting. And they said that's not always possible. And I'll give you a great example is we just did an officer involved shooting where we played a tape where Officer Mosier lost his life. And he did not have an opportunity because it happened so quick. And you could see that that's not going to be an opportunity to always warn somebody before lethal force is used. And I think that's the one area where law enforcement says that's really not reasonable considering all circumstances. Now, does that mean that it's not used in some instances? No, there should be, when possible, before the lethal force is used. And I think typically officers do commands before lethal force is actually used in an instance. So I think actually Johnson County has been using the 8 factors, but that for some time now. I know they don't use chokeholds. And so I think actually, again, Johnson County has been leading the way and being progressive in their policing. And I know they're always willing to look at, can we do better? And I think that's important to have agencies that are willing to look in the mirror and say, can we do better to serve everybody and be fair to everybody?
Thank you for clarifying your position on that. And I'll now turn it over to Mr. Thomas to ask the same question. Understanding the tenets of the 8 Can't Wait campaign, what are your thoughts on whether you would support implementing those initiatives through Johnson County's public safety agencies?
And just to be clear, in terms of supporting that, yes, 100%. In terms of ordering that or mandating that officers follow the 8 Can't Wait protocol, that's not within the purview of district attorney. We can talk about what we'd like, but ultimately, we're not law enforcement's boss. That's what's up to the police chiefs. We are blessed here in Johnson County with absolutely fantastic law enforcement. I've had the pleasure of traveling around the state to handle cases, to deal with other law enforcement agencies. I've seen how bad it can be, and I've seen how great our law enforcement agencies are here. I want to highlight two specific agencies for already really embracing this. Right as the summer of racial, and I'm trying to use your words, but right as this summer began and all of these issues arose, law enforcement agents throughout the county spoke out. When we're talking about police chiefs, Chief Hounslow came out and immediately called to attention the need for law enforcement officers to call out their own for violating the laws or being unjust. He was the first that I saw to do that publicly, and he deserves credit for that. They've banned explicitly the use of chokeholds. They've done absolutely fantastic work in the city of Lenexa. In Overland Park, Chief Donchez has spoken about the 8 can't wait. They've embraced that sentiment as well. Law enforcement officers in our county, police chiefs in our county, have taken the lead to make huge strides towards addressing these issues. So I am proud of them and I applaud them. As a district attorney, I would support that movement. I would talk to them about it. I will talk to the public about it. Ultimately, the onus rests on the police chiefs and the police departments themselves to implement that. But I am very proud of where law enforcement stands today, and they deserve the recognition that they are some of the best in the state, if not the best.
Thank you both for your responses to that question, and to both of you also the appreciation that we've extended to our police officers and departments. That is meaningful, and I know that Mr. Howe, you also noted the untimely loss of Mr. Mosier and Officer Mosier, and our hearts do go out to him and his family as well. I want to kind of delve into some specific questions that have come from our partners related to policing as well. So we'll stay on this topic. We received a question regarding the use of chokeholds. I know that Mr. Howe, you mentioned this in your last response, but I wanted to throw this question specifically back at you, Mr. Thomas. Where do you stand regarding the use of chokeholds by police departments? And just kind of expand upon that a little bit.
Chokeholds should be the ultimate last result. Ultimately, I'm not going to say what an officer can or can't do or what they should or should not do. Law enforcement goes through training. Law enforcement deals with situations that require split-second decision-making. Yet then they have a lifetime of review. What's best and what's most appropriately used is up to the police chiefs and the people who do the training. I've seen a number of agencies here in the community say they're not going to use chokeholds unless it's an absolute last resort. It's easy for us to say, ban it all immediately. But if a situation arises and the officer either has to draw his weapon or put somebody in a chokehold, I think we'd all agree that chokehold to subdue the individual would be far better than an officer firing a weapon. So I'll leave it up to the officers to determine that and dictate that. I think the movement we have established so far and the trend that's going through the county in terms of addressing these 8 can't wait issues is absolutely fantastic. And our police chiefs must be applauded for that. And so ultimately I'd leave the decision up to them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Howe, do you have additional thoughts on the chokeholds or any other areas of policing that you believe may need reform?
Well, first of all, as district attorney, one of the roles I have is I am a member of the Johnson County Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, and we meet monthly to discuss various issues, including policies and best practices involving law enforcement. So that helps me keep in tune with what they are doing and what they are changing. I would agree with Mr. Thomas that you can't say in all instances you can't use a chokehold, because in a life and death situation, that may be their last resort. But I do know that the law enforcement agencies do not train that to make that as a way to subdue an individual. So I think there's a distinction there, because the training and practices of the law enforcement agencies are not to use that there's other methods that they use to subdue an individual without using a chokehold. But I do agree in a life and death situation that may be the only resort in order to save that officer's life or a life of others. And so I think that's a positive thing. I think it's one that allows law enforcement to use probably more effective techniques to subdue individuals without causing serious injury to the people they're having to arrest. So I do think Mr. Thomas and I agree for the most part on those issues.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like we're hearing a lot of, empowering the police departments to make those decisions at the time as they've been trained. So thank you for clarifying, both of you, for that. I'm going to continue with this line of questioning focused on social justice and responses. There's a question here about a recent social justice protest in Overland Park, where there were reports of police officers not wearing badges and refusing to identify themselves when asked to do so. Could you all clarify whether police officers are required by law to identify themselves under such circumstances? And as DA, what is your role in handling this type of situation? And Mr. Howe, we'll begin with you.
Well, first of all, there's no law that requires an officer to either identify themselves or have their name on their uniform. Now, I don't know the reasons why they took that approach. I can guess, and I think really probably more than anything, it's about doxing law enforcement and going after them and their families. May have been the concern why law enforcement in that instance did not have their names on their uniforms. However, each and every one of those officers were properly identified law enforcement officers that day or that night. And in those instances, as district attorney, my job is to uphold the constitutional rights of all individuals. And that includes the right to protest. And it's our God-given right in the United States to be able to protest freely without repercussions. Our founding fathers were really big into that because back in the Revolutionary War days, if you spoke out against the king, you got jailed. And so that's why the First Amendment is the First Amendment. But the First Amendment does not protect individuals who infringe upon rights of others or breaking the law. And that's where the delineation is under the Constitution. And I think it's important that while people have a right to peacefully protest, they don't have a right to destroy property or assault others. And so, it's my duty to make sure that we are enforcing the law appropriately and defending all people's constitutional rights. As far as the tactics used by law enforcement, as we alluded to in our previous answer, I'm not a law enforcement officer. I don't have training, and I'm going to leave tactical decisions to the Overland Park Police Department on how they handle that situation. But I do believe that they complied with the law, did things appropriately, and that the individuals who were arrested is because they violated the law and they violated other rights. And so I think that's why I think it's important to make sure that we know the facts before we do anything as district attorney.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Thomas, it's your turn to respond to that question.
Looks like Mr. Howe and I will agree on a lot of things today to some extent. I was posed this question multiple times following this incident and over the course of the campaign. I've not seen any law, any municipal court ordinance, any police training law that says they must identify themselves or wear identifying information. I've seen this happen a lot with clients of mine, of people posing questions where they say they saw it on TV or they heard that they have this right. Same thing with various other issues that come up in the criminal court. How is my role, how as DA would I affect this or address this? The first thing is education, to make sure people truly understand what's going on. When questions are posed, to have an answer for them and to direct it exactly. This forum is a fantastic opportunity. However, there needs to be more, because the more we educate the public on what truly is the law, the more trust and confidence they can have in us as a DA or in their own law enforcement officers. I've had the pleasure of attending multiple protests, rallies, marches. I've spoken at a couple of them. I've had the honor of listening to complaints, listening to Johnson County residents talk about what their issues are and what their concerns are. I've had the honor of answering their questions there. Alongside me has been law enforcement. They've been fantastic at the protests and the rallies. But there are issues that do arise. We've seen it all across the country. We've got allegations here. The right to protest is one that needs to be protected. But as Mr. Howe said, the moment there's a violation of the law, that's what law enforcement is there for. So we've got to talk to the public, talk to the county, and make sure they understand where the distinctions lay and what rules and laws actually exist versus what is the perception. So I would do all I can to continue to educate, continue to converse, and I would continue to participate in those marches and rallies. Because I'm not scared. I won't hide behind the fact that racial inequities exist. Black lives do matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. And I'm going to ask this next question, which is about, it's kind of similar. It's about racial disparities that exist in enforcement, prosecution, and sentencing, sometimes for low-level drug usage. There are national organizations such as the Equal Justice Institute, for which the movie Just Mercy was based off of. We also have other organizations such as the local Midwest Innocence Project that are fighting on behalf of to exonerate the wrongfully convicted. So my question to you, and I'll begin with Mr. Thomas, is, what will you as district attorney do to address potential examples of systemic racism?
Well, the first thing we have to do is admit that it exists. Explicitly state that racial inequities do exist. For 3 debates now, I've asked my opponent to say that. And for 3 debates, he's failed to say that. He'll couch it in terms of general bias, about talking to jurors about general bias. That's not enough. You have to state what the issue is. Racial inequities exist within Johnson County. Black lives do matter. I'll ask my opponent to admit or state either one of those explicitly. How do we address it? Well, once we admit it, we take a look at what's going on. We obtain data. And there's lots of opportunities to gather the data. But what you do with that data afterwards is what's vital. How you show the public the data is extremely vital. There's current data being collected by the CJAC Council, but that's not publicly readily available. What we need to do is make it available. I talked last about educating the public. Well, let's get this data out for everyone to see. We can't have it hidden behind closed doors because then people don't know what the issues are. We need to have some sort of dashboard, whether it's online at the district attorney's portal or something that can convey the stats, convey the data to the general public. Because until you do that, until you're fully transparent, there's always going to be a question of what's going on here? What are they hiding from us? And that's where the distrust, that's where distrust community arises with law enforcement and the community. That's where distrust with the district attorney arises. So we'll collect that data, we'll look at it, we'll put it out to the public to make sure they know what's going on, and we're going to track it. We'll make changes over time to address where the issues are, where the shortcomings are, and then we'll watch how we progress. But until you explicitly admit that a problem exists, you're never going to resolve the issue or even properly address it. So I'll pose the question to Mr. Howe, now in front of the NAACP. You've refused to say it the last 3 times, but will you admit that racial inequities exist in Johnson County? I'll leave it at that.
Okay, turning the question to Mr. Howe. Initially, I'd asked about data that is showing racial disparities that exist potentially in enforcement, prosecution, and sentencing. And how will you as district attorney, how are you as district attorney addressing the examples of systemic racism?
That's a great question, and one that Johnson County's been working on for a number of years. As the DA, I take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution and people's rights, and it includes those involved in the criminal justice system, because we are ministers of justice. And that, as Lady Justice has a blindfold on, so should prosecutors in the way that we treat individuals. There is implicit bias that's out there. And we've done a study already that talks about there's some little things that we need to do to make sure that that implicit bias doesn't creep into our system and create inequities. So, if you want to talk about whether it's systemic racism, I don't believe our system is racist. So I don't believe that, but I do believe there's implicit bias. in the system, and our research has done that. Mr. Thomas hasn't been involved for the last 5 or 6 years in our review of the system. My office has, both in the adult and the juvenile system. We actually got some grant money to review the juvenile justice system from arrest all the way through the system. And in fact, this organization, the NAACP, was part of the small work group on that federal grant. I believe Wanda Minor was the individual that was the person assigned to that. We did that, and we have great data through our GEM system. We're able to track our data, provide that data, and then see the results. And what we found was there were little things that did create inequities in our system. And based on that, we made changes to make it more fair, I guess you would call it, to everyone that's involved in the system. And so Johnson County, again, has been leading the way, and we're not afraid to look at tough questions. And those small groups also included law enforcement. And then guess what we did? We took the information and did a speakers bureau, the NAACP. We met with you, and we went out in the community and talked to people about what we found and what our goals are to correct those situations. So once again, we're not afraid of this, and we've led the way in trying to reach out to the community. So we're doing a lot of great things in that area, but we're not done, and we need to continue to be being able to examine ourselves to make sure that we're doing the very best for everyone.
Thank you both for your thoughtful responses to that question. Before we continue on, I do want to remind people that you can email questions to this live event by sending them to virtualdaforumevent@gmail.com. Again, virtualdaforumevent@gmail.com. Our next question is about training, and it relates to cultural competence, which is the ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. Cultural competence encompasses being aware of one's own worldview, developing positive attitudes towards cultural differences, and gaining knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews. Mr. Howe, what is your plan, or what are your efforts to build and maintain cultural competency and racial inclusion and equity among attorneys in your office?
Well, first of all, I've been very proud of the fact that over the 12 years as DA, we've continued to grow the number of minority employees in our office. And so that's something that I think is important, because I think there's real value in being able to connect with victims of crime by having some diversity in my office. And so that's something that I've really worked hard at. I've actually talked to members of the NAACP about some strategies. How do we get more minority candidates to apply for our position? How do we get the law schools to have minority candidates in law schools want to be prosecutors? And so that's something that's been difficult to do, but something I continue to put a huge emphasis on. The other thing is, under my leadership, we have one, and soon we'll have 2 different employees who are Spanish speaking. And that's a huge issue for us, being able to meet the needs of that population. And so I think it's really, really important, because to me, if we have diversity in our office, the better our ability to understand the needs of the people in our community. And we have a diverse community. Our community is much different than it was 20 years ago in Johnson County. It's much more diverse. And so our office should reflect what the community looks like, and we should do our very best to meet those needs. And so I think that is important, and it's something that I continue to build on and hope to continue to expand that diversity within my office.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, how about you? What is your plan, or what would your plan be to build or maintain cultural competency and racial inclusion and equity among attorneys in your office if you were to be elected?
Right off the bat, electing me doubles the minority population in the district attorney's office. Mr. Howe's work at increasing diversity has 1 minority attorney in his office. Electing me doubles that. I have spoken to diverse groups. You want to talk about getting lawyers in the DA's office? We'll talk to the lawyers themselves. I've visited law schools to talk about criminal defense work. I've visited with the Asian Bar Association, the Hispanic Bar Association, KC Legal, Jackson County Bar Association, to talk about criminal work, to talk about how fulfilling, how incredibly challenging it is, and to pique their interest. I'm a diverse candidate. Mr. Howe talks about how we may have 1 or 2 Hispanic speaking employees in the office. Pero yo puedo hablar español. In the year 2000, I foresaw the necessity of Spanish in my life. I didn't wait for 20 years. I realized Spanish would be integral, and I majored in Spanish at Vanderbilt University. He pats himself on the back for getting a Spanish-speaking employee in the office in the year 2019. The demographics of Johnson County have been changing, but the trend has been evident for years. We don't need to be reactive. We need to be proactive. We need to speak to people proactively, not reactively. We need to encourage individuals, whether it's lawyers or law enforcement, to show them in those groups, hey, I'm an Indian American. I can go talk to Indian Americans and talk about the law, talk about how much I love it, how much passion I have for it. I can talk to the various bar organizations. I can talk to the law schools. I have done that. I will do that. And I promise to keep on doing that. Diversity is very important. It not only affects just on paper, but it affects how attorneys view cases, how attorneys have a different perspective. That perspective is vital. That perspective is necessary. I'm running for DA because I bring that breadth of perspective, not only as a minority candidate, but as a criminal lawyer. And I promise to continue to strive to increase that by multitudes, not just one.
Thank you. The next question is about your position regarding cooperating with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So, Mr. Thomas, what is your position regarding that cooperation when undocumented individuals are cited for minor offenses?
I am an elected official for the County of Johnson, state of Kansas. ICE is a federal entity. A lot of times these issues present themselves not at the district attorney's office, but when the individual is housed in jail. That's when an immigration hold is put on them, and then they are picked up by immigration authorities. As district attorney, I'm beholden to the county residents. If a federal judge or a federal prosecutor wants to prosecute these individuals, that's outside my purview. I don't think politics has a role in how the DA governs. I know the current district attorney's office has followed political pursuits and proactively gone after undocumenteds that did not commit a crime other than being here illegally. That's not what the district attorney is supposed to be doing. That's not a county law. That is a federal mandate, a federal law. So if immigration attorneys or immigration agents come out here because they're looking for undocumented individuals, I can't stop them. That's the federal jurisdiction. I won't stop them. But I'm not going to proactively go after undocumented populations under the guise of identity thefts without punishing the same employers that employed those same people.
Thank you. Mr. Howe, your chance to answer that question about cooperation with ICE when undocumented individuals are cited for minor offenses.
We have a duty and a responsibility to uphold the Constitution of the United States and state of Kansas and all the laws. And I will not get in the way of federal law enforcement if they have appropriate orders from a judge to take a person into federal custody. And we do that all the time. And it's the rule of law should apply. And I think it's also important for people to understand that we deal with undocumented people all the time. And those are victims. And we fill out dozens and dozens of U visas. Those U visas protect that individual so they won't be deported because they merely reported that they were a victim of a crime, of violence. And so, we protect those victims, whether they're undocumented or documented aliens in this country. And I think it's important to remember that we do that. In regards to the cases that Mr. Thomas talks about, what's interesting is that case went to the United States Supreme Court. And you know what the United States Supreme Court said? Johnson County was right. They upheld the convictions. and said that when somebody commits an identity theft, they should be held accountable by local officials. And I will tell you, I'm very fair about this. I prosecute undocumented people. I prosecute citizens. I don't care who you are. I don't care your immigration status. But if you're committing identity theft to another person, I am going to prosecute you. And so I think that's the fair thing, the just thing to do. I don't think you should have immunity from prosecution just because you're illegally in this country. And I'm sorry, but I always put it in the hands of, we've got to think about the victims of that identity theft and what it does to them. But we treat everybody fairly, and that includes victims of crime. And we really want to be fair to all victims, no matter who you are, what your background is, what you look like, and provide justice to those individuals. And I think that's the key to our success.
Thank you. Now, one of our partners, the Johnson County United, has presented data that shows that in Johnson County, African Americans and Latinx folks make up about 5% to 11% of the population, respectively. But they are responsible for 15% to 20% of the traffic stops. What do you believe is behind such disparities, and what will your role be in addressing this? Mr. Howe, I'll give that to you first.
Well, we actually looked at that. I'm thinking it's at least 5 years ago. We actually looked at some of that data in Johnson County from the various departments to determine, was there true disparity going on? And I think one of the things that we did when we were in the Criminal Justice Advisory Council, which is made up of citizens as well as members of the criminal justice agencies, including law enforcement, is we evaluated not only what the minority population was in Johnson County, but in our surrounding counties, Wyandotte, Jackson County, Missouri. And the reason why that's important is all you have to do is, when you're driving on the highway, look at the tags. And the tags indicate that people are coming in and out of our county from different counties. And so it's important when we look at that raw data on stops, do we have disproportionate minority stops of Johnson County individuals, or is there a disparity that also takes into place what our minority population in our adjoining counties are? And I know most recently, the Olathe Police Department has basically said, we're pretty close to being spot on with our traffic stops based on the Johnson County population. And then if you take the numbers of individuals who live outside the county who have been stopped, it's actually, the disparity actually is reduced to almost zero. And so I think that, again, and that's something that we talked about years ago, about you have to be careful about getting all the data and breaking it down. Now, does that mean that there isn't any driving while black going on in our county? No, I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that that doesn't occur. But is it a systemic issue that across all the Johnson County law enforcement agencies? No, I don't think it exists to that extent.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Thomas, your reply? 2 minutes.
So the last statement was, it wasn't a systemic issue, yet it does exist. I'd ask Mr. Howe to pinpoint which agencies have it. If it's a general term, then it is in fact a systemic issue. When posed the question before, Mr. Howe still couldn't say that racial inequities exist. He still hasn't said it. He actually said the opposite, that it's not a systemic issue. Simply put, we are all more aware than ever that racial inequities exist. And until you address that, until you admit it, you can't properly address it. And I'm not saying that this is out of outward hatred, racism, or intentional actions, but there are inequities and they do exist. So how do we fix that? We look at what's going on and we look at what causes those instances to arise. Mr. Howe's talked about the CJAC information. They did a study on the juvenile courts. They found out that if you were a youth of color, you were 3.8, well, how do I say this? For every one white youth put into detention, there were 3.8 youths of color put into detention. That's a problem. That's a very significant problem that you need to talk about, that you need to address. Furthermore, with respect to the traffic stops and the question posed directly here, A lot of these stops, a lot of these issues arise because they're crimes of poverty, because an individual can't afford the underlying ticket, and then they're pulled over for a driving while suspended, and then they're kept in that continual loop, because if you can't pay the original ticket, how are you going to pay your bond and your future tickets? It just keeps on putting you in a downward spiral. As district attorney, I will address that issue. We will take action to address how those crimes are prosecuted, how we make these individuals post bond when they already can't afford it. Well, that's an issue. These problems don't arise overnight, and they're not going to be solved overnight. But the only way to properly solve them is to properly admit that they exist. And time in and time out, my opponent has refused to admit that racial inequities exist. He actually just admitted the opposite and said it's not a systematic issue.
All right, thank you. Before we transition to some of the questions we're now beginning to get in from our viewers, I wanted to ask the both of you, beginning with Mr. Thomas, whether you support the release of all information to the public pertaining to an officer-involved shooting. Please explain why or why not.
You can't generally state right now or universally state that the release of all information is prudent or proper. So I will not answer yes to that. I will say no. What I will tell you is that I've told you over and over again that I am going to hold myself to the highest standards of being transparent and accountable. The Kansas City Star did an article a few months ago where they asked all the local Jackson County, Johnson County, Wyandotte County, how do you handle officer-involved shootings? The other counties all sent their elected official out to the scene. In Johnson County, Mr. Howe said, I send my chief deputy. Well, that changes in 2020. The buck stops with me. I'll be going out to these scenes personally. I will assure you that I will hold myself accountable and I will obtain the information. And then when I obtain that information and when I come back and talk to the families or talk to the public, I will be fully transparent. I will be fully transparent as to why a shooting was justified. And when I give my list of reasons, I will give you all the reasons and I will give you the facts that back that up. I will not allow for an officer to be hung out to dry by not disclosing all of the information I had at my hands. But if the shooting was unjustified, I will do the very same thing. I will tell you exactly why it was unjustified. I will tell you where the facts are and how they stand. There won't be any questions of doubt. There won't be any issues of victims' families saying, I didn't get answers from the DA's office. I won't answer those questions privately. And when it comes time to releasing information, I won't hide behind Kansas Open Records Act, or I won't hide behind any other laws. I will disclose what is necessary to show the public that my justifications or unjustifications were valid and they make sense and they hold water, because that's what's important. If you give a statement that doesn't hold water, even on just one of your reasons, the entire statement is called into doubt. It's kind of why we're in an FBI investigation with the current DA's office right now. I won't let that happen to our county. I won't let that happen to our law enforcement officers or the families of victims or the Johnson County public.
Okay, Mr. Howe, your response to whether you support the release of information to the public pertaining to officer-involved shootings.
First of all, great story by Mr. Thomas, not accurate in any way, and I'll go over why it's not accurate. First of all, I'm not open to opening all records because there's a lot of private and public private information in there, including HIPAA information, and it would not be productive for the family or anyone to open the entire record. Now let's talk about transparency. My office goes out to the scene of every officer-involved shooting, an investigator and my chief deputy, and sometimes I go out. And so the investigation is led by the OSIT team. In 2005, it was started, way long before all these other departments had started to do it. It is an independent investigation team to give some surety that there is a true and independent investigation done. That is turned over to my office. I review the facts, I review the law, and make a determination based on that. Now, I just don't stop there. I sit down with the family each and every time and try to answer any questions they have. So that is done each and every time. I also produce a written report that sets out the facts and applies the law and why I made the decision I did. And then I have a press conference and I answer every question that the media might have. And in some instances, when we have videos, I play the videos. So my question is, how is it, can I be any more transparent than doing those things? And, you know, people may not like my answer, but they at least know the reasons for my answer. And that is what we call transparency. And in regards to that investigation, Mr. Thomas, you know, I can't apply federal law. So they're taking the same facts and applying federal law to see if there's any civil rights violations, which I could never bring. So even if you become DA, you're not going to do anything on that because you don't have the authority under federal law. So that is all that is going on at this point, is they're taking the same facts and applying it. So transparency and providing the public the reasons for the decisions has been something I've done from day one as your district attorney.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it now to one of our first questions from viewers. And this is a clarification question for you, Mr. Howe, regarding an earlier answer. The viewer wrote, Mr. Howe mentioned that it was our, let's see here, mentioned that he believes implicit bias exists, but that racism is not prevalent in our criminal justice system. Can you explain the difference?
For me, racism means that I intentionally, or one of my staff members or somebody in the criminal justice system is intentionally trying to target a person of color to treat them differently. That is what I consider racism, intentional acts. What I think has been shown is there is implicit bias, which is, it may be that some of our life experiences that we have a bias that we don't know about that may influence our ability to be fair and impartial. And that's what those studies in my disproportionate minority context, that the review that we did, it brought all that information on, and we figured out there were little processes in our system that were making, because of the way they were set up, it was causing disproportionate minority contacts and results. We took the information from the federal grant, we applied it and made those changes. Now, does that mean that we've solved all problems? No, but we've made it a better system. And then also the second component is going out and talking to the community to help build trust. And like I said, we met with the NAACP and presented the results, and we've gone out into had a speakers bureau and actually went out into the community to talk about these things. I think it's an ongoing issue. I think we need to continue to look at it. There is a problem that exists, but we need to address that problem. And so hopefully that helps provide greater definition of what I meant.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. The next question is something that the two of you all have touched on a little bit already, and that is about some of the things that are working well within our police departments and within several of our municipalities. You've cited specific cities, Lenexa. We have another response from a constituent talking about the transparency and data collection and reporting that's going on in Mission, and folks are wondering whether it's these best practices from, policing in Lenexa to other places. What are some best practices that you've seen at either the local or the national level that you would want to take to Johnson County and perhaps apply here? And we'll begin with Mr. Thomas.
First off, I want to go back real quick in response to Mr. Howe's comment. He says that we have implicit bias, but no systematic issue. Implicit bias is a cause. What he says exists is the very thing, racial inequities. Yet, for the entire campaign, he's refused to say it. Today, in front of the NAACP, I guess politics has him admit to an implicit bias, but not racial inequities. One of the best practices I've seen is admitting issues exist. Admitting racial inequities exist. Other ones, yes, I failed to mention the great work in Mission. They are reporting complaints both internally from their own officers and externally, and making that publicly accessible. That's what I've been preaching this entire campaign. If we have data, let's make it accessible to the public. Let's not require them to go to meetings to get it, or require them to look long and hard on various organizations' websites. Let's create a dashboard. Let's create some sort of issue or website that has this data out there for people to see, for people to review. Because then you'll see that inequities exist. You'll see that racial inequities are as clear as can be, and we can address that. Being transparent is vital. Because of instances over the course of years, there's a significant distrust amongst the communities of color and law enforcement and or their district attorneys. You don't fix that. We don't bridge that gap by simply staying behind closed doors in meetings. You go out to the public. You participate in events. You talk to them, you educate them. You show them how one of their own can rise to the ranks of a candidate, can have the honor of sitting before the NAACP, talking with Mr. Howe, the current DA, about how they can make change and better their communities. You look to law enforcement specifically, and you applaud the police chiefs that are going out against the grain. Chief Hounslow immediately calling out for officers to call out their own in light of the George Floyd incident. Overland Park Police in working with organizations like JoCo United to implement programs that change, to change policies to make sure future tragedies don't occur. Best practices are all around us. Fortunately for us here in Johnson County, we're surrounded by some of the best law enforcement and the best leaders around.
Thank you. Mr. Howe, what best practices would you want to share, either from local or national sources?
Well, first of all, I do agree that we have a great law enforcement community, and we work on problem solving issues such as disparity in arrest and their practices. And that's why, as a member of the Johnson County Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, we talk about those things and we come up with solutions. And then we work with CJAC. And, you know, Mr. Thomas shows his lack of experience and knowledge in the Johnson County system. He says, well, you can't get that information. Yes, you can. If you just know who to call the Criminal Justice Advisory Council. We have public meetings every single time. I mean, for the last 15 years, I've been involved in CJAC. Where has Mr. Thomas been if he's so passionate about these issues? He only became passionate when he started to run for DA. I've never seen him at the table. And I am sure members of your association haven't seen him there either. And I've been at the table. I've had discussions about changing policies and practices, about tweaking systems so we can be fairer to all people. And that's why Johnson County has, again, led the way. We're not falling behind as he wants to portray, but we're willing to lead in these areas, including racial disparities in the criminal justice system. That's why we've gotten federal grants. That's why we've addressed these issues and take the information and not ignore it, but implement programs and practices to reduce that disparity. We've been doing that for years. Mr. Thomas, I wish you had been at the table. I wish you had been at those meetings to provide your input, but you weren't there. And I know we came up with solutions and we went to the public and talked about it. And if you want to provide greater advice and help to get out to the minority community than we've already done, I welcome that. But you know what? Johnson County's been doing it for over 5 years. And so I think, again, we're doing a great job of helping, working with law enforcement to recognize these issues and come up with solutions.
Thank you both for that, for those responses. Now, we've been talking a lot about transparency. And so in this moment, I'm going to be transparent and let you know that the next question is about a topic of which I have very little knowledge, and that is exculpatory evidence. So this comes from one of our viewers who says that exculpatory evidence is evidence favorable to the defendant in the criminal trial that exonerates or tends to exonerate the defendant of guilt. What is your stance on turning over exculpatory evidence to the defense during a trial? So who was it who answered our last question first? Was that you, Mr. Thomas? So then this question, and certainly Mr. Howe, help me out with the definition if that isn't spot on, but please answer the question about exculpatory evidence.
Sure. Not only do I have a constitutional duty, but I have a statutory duty to provide all evidence, including exculpatory evidence. And Johnson County has always had a policy, instead of delaying the receipt of the evidence to defense counsel, we actually exceed the statutory requirements. And so when Mr. Thomas wants to enter his appearance on behalf of one of his clients, all he has to do is notify us of that. And then we will provide all exculpatory evidence. And that evidence, that duty continues. So let's say I get some additional evidence 2 months later that is involved in the case. Then I have a duty to also provide that information to Mr. Thomas. And if I don't do that, then guess what? Not only can I get the case dismissed or reversed, but I can have an ethics complaint brought against me or one of my members of my staff. And so we have an absolute duty. Again, we are ministers of justice under Kansas Supreme Court rules. We have an absolute duty, if we think someone is being wrongfully prosecuted, to dismiss the case. And what a lot of people don't understand is it is not unheard of that we're in the middle of a case and we get new evidence and we're no longer confident about the prosecution. And guess what? We have an obligation to dismiss that case. And if Mr. Thomas brought evidence to us to exonerate somebody, we have a duty to do the right thing. And that's what I tell my people. The right thing is what is right under the law. And so it's something that I think is really, really important to have those type of ethics in your office. And we make it a big deal in my office to talk about ethics and responsibility because prosecutors have so much authority and power that we do it the right way.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, your thoughts on turning over exculpatory evidence to the defense?
Once again, Mr. Howe and myself are in agreement. The law explicitly states that this evidence must be turned over. Failure to disclose it results in a dismissal of the case and other civil potential remedies as well if there's intentional action. So yes, you absolutely have to disclose it. You have to disclose that for the sake of justice. The problem is if there's not trust between the district attorney's office and the public, who is the defendant, or the attorney's office, well, then how are you ever sure that you got the exculpatory evidence? That's why I've been preaching and talking about how important it is to be fully transparent and to hold yourself accountable. If a mistake happens, that's got to be admitted publicly and that's got to be addressed publicly. That's the way you maintain trust. And so I have absolutely no doubt that Mr. Howe does tell his assistants, make sure you disclose this evidence. You have an obligation to. I know all the assistant district attorneys over there are fantastic folks in Johnson County, and they're good lawyers. I don't have any question of veracity when they tell me we don't have this information or they've disclosed everything. The only change or amendment I would make to this system is that Johnson County still requires a CD and paper for discovery. We need to get up with the times. We need to move forward and have this done electronically. As soon as I enter my appearance in a case, I should get the discovery or that request should be noted. It shouldn't require me filling out a separate form and taking that to the office to pick up a CD. I've had countless attorneys who have asked me, because I office so close to the courthouse, can you go grab discovery for me? That is a hurdle. That prolongs their review of the discovery. And this is something that's changed over counties on both sides of the state over time. We need to make a move to do it. We need to do it as soon as possible. But with respect to the question, it's the law. I will follow the law as much as can be and as I should. And Mr. Howe's done the same thing, and I have no doubt to question that.
Excellent. Thank you both. The next question is also somewhat of a legal principle question, so I'll do my best with it. As I understand it, in the United States, qualified immunity is a principle that grants government officials performing discretionary functions immunity from civil suits unless the plaintiff shows that the official violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. So I'm asking the both of you about your position on qualified immunity for police officers specifically involved in shootings here in our city, in our county. So Mr. Thomas, we'll begin with you.
Qualified immunity is a very difficult and touchy situation because the language itself is inherently difficult and confusing. You did a fantastic job of describing what it is in terms of protecting officers from civil liability, from civil prosecution. I believe that qualified immunity does exist and is necessary in certain situations. If an officer blatantly violates I think the legal jargon is clearly established rules or clearly established constitutional rights of an individual, qualified immunity does not exist. And we've seen that over the years. We've seen that here in the county. We've seen it all across the state. It is a civil protection. Without it, it opens the door to various problems, whether it's law enforcement acting in the protection of the safety of others, or if you want to take a back seat, it's whether or not officers have to incur insurance costs, and then that cost is passed on to the taxpayers. So for civil liability and the purposes that it is there, I think qualified immunity serves its purpose, because it doesn't say that the law enforcement agency can't be held accountable. It doesn't say that criminally the law enforcement officer won't be held accountable. It's a civil protection to protect the individual officer in their capacity. The agency that officer works for can still be held civilly liable, and oftentimes is. But for the individual officer itself, I think it is a necessity that allows for law enforcement to act, allows for them to protect the safety of others as well as themselves. And it is a necessity right now.
Thank you. Mr. Howe, your thoughts?
Well, law enforcement has that qualified immunity, and so do prosecutors, because they're public servants as well. And really the purpose of qualified immunity was to protect people from being harassed by civil suit for doing their job. And that's really what the purpose is. So you don't have harassment suits. And there's a need for it, because if you eliminate it in its entirety, you're going to have a hard time finding people wanting to be police officers. And that's not a good thing for the community. So there is a need to have qualified immunity. And again, Mr. Thomas and I are in agreement. We've agreed a lot today on certain principles that I think we all understand under the law makes sense. And so, there's a lot of talk nationally about, do we change qualified immunity? And I think you don't want to ever go full tilt into let's just eliminate it. I think some of the discussion is about, do you somehow modify it to include some kind of reckless behavior that maybe doesn't meet the current standard, but maybe is reckless conduct or wanton conduct, which are legal terms. But again, that would take a lot of research to determine, how it would impact law enforcement. So there's a need for it. I think the bigger issue is getting rid of bad cops. And in Johnson County, I have a Giglio policy that if someone is doing unethical conduct, the police departments around here get rid of them. They just don't tolerate it. But other jurisdictions, because of their unions, are not able to get rid of bad cops. And really, the cities need to own it, because they negotiated that contract and they put the chiefs in a really difficult situation of retaining bad cops. And good cops don't want bad cops on their force. And really, that is the systemic problem across this country, is large police agencies not being able to police their own because the unions have too much power in the negotiation process. And if we eliminated some of that, I think we'd see a lot better results across this country.
Excellent. Thank you all for both taking time to educate me and our viewers on both of those last two questions. Now, you've also educated us that in the role of DA, you don't have the power to really enact police reform, and I appreciate that clarification. We are getting questions though that ask a hypothetical, and I know how lawyers feel about hypotheticals, so I'm reluctant to ask this question, but nonetheless, the question is, if you did have the ability to institute some type of police reform, what, if any, would you want to lead with? And Mr. Howe, I will turn that over to you.
I don't know if it would be deemed reform. I think some of our agencies do a really good job of reaching out in our community and contacting different groups in their community to help build trust. And I think some agencies need to do a better job of it. And I think if I had the power to do something, I would make it more uniformed across our county, that reaching out to our community and trying to build that trust. In regards to other reform, I hate to sound like a broken record, but man, our police agencies are really proactive and leading the way in not instituting archaic policing, including our sheriff. I mean, if you look at some of the things that we do, we're cutting edge in our conduct out on the streets. And, let's also talk about our jail. I mean, our sheriff, and part of our CJAC meetings is coming up with solutions. One of the things was we've got now, if somebody's incarcerated, we do an assessment to determine if they have a substance abuse or a mental health issue, and connect them up with necessary resources early on when they're booked into jail. We've also really implemented some great policies as far as pretrial assessments. And most minor crimes in Johnson County, you get a personal recognizance bond and you're out the door. And the reason why we do that is we don't want to fill our jails with minor offenders. And so Johnson County's been doing that for over 5 years based on our work with CJAC. I keep talking about CJAC, but that is a group that gets us all together to do those types of reforms. So we aren't incarcerating people for minor offenses, as Mr. Thomas indicated, for the driving while suspended people who it's all social economic issues. And I agree with them wholeheartedly. That's a big problem with that's difficult to grab onto, but we don't keep them in our jail. So if you are a low-level offender and you're in our jail, you're given a PR bond. That's the reality. If you look at our facts, if you look at the sheriff's office and their facts, we don't incarcerate low-level offenders with no criminal history. That's just not done. And so we've been, again, leading the way in that type of reform and policing that I think provides justice and fair application of the law for all people.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, your turn.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get the mute up. With regards to police reform, once again, Mr. Howe and myself agree. That's up to the individual police agencies and the chiefs to conduct that. I think we've seen a strong start for reforms done, and I applaud, and I made the mistake of leaving out interim chief from Mission as well, but I applaud the chiefs that have gone out and already made public explicit statements. Chief Hongslow, Chief Donchez, and interim chief, and I'm blanking on his name, I apologize, for Mission. What we can do, and what I would have the purview to do, is change the policies on policing with regards to how we're going to prosecute cases. When you've got a low-level possession case of marijuana, does that individual need to be arrested and taken to jail, post a bond, and then go through that process? I don't think that's fair. When in city courts, they're given a ticket in order to appear. In other counties, it's a fine and release. So how do we address that? We address it by changing what our priorities are as a DA's office and focusing on the violent crimes and getting rid of the low-level offenders. I do take objection or issue with one thing Mr. Howe said. For the entirety of the campaign, he's gotten mad at me for using the terms minor crimes and low-level offenders. Said he didn't know what that means. And now he tells you that low-level offenders are given a signature bond, or minor crimes are given a signature bond so they can sign themselves out. As a lawyer in the actual courtroom, that's not the case. People are still ordered to have bonds. It may be minor to some people, that $1,500 cash surety bond, but that's still a cash surety bond that a lot of people can't post. So to explicitly state that we give everybody of a minor crime a personal recognizance or signature bond, that's not true. You only need to go to court at 1:30, the video court with Judge Vokins, to see that that's not true. But what do? We put into place things like specialty courts, drug court, and mental health court. We address the underlying issue of individuals that continuously reoffend, and we fix that. And we put them on a path to success, not only so they better their lives, but so our law enforcement can focus on the crimes that matter. They're not stuck re-arresting the same individuals over and over again. Our assistant district attorneys aren't stuck re-prosecuting the same individuals over and over again. That's where reform would take place in my office, is by getting rid of what we now, I guess, agree on are low-level offenders. So, yes, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And to both of you all, our time is coming to a close. It's flown by. Before we conclude today, I do want to give each of you the opportunity to provide 2 minutes of closing remarks. So, Mr. Thomas, I will lead with you.
I've said it time and time again. You'll see it on social media. You'll see it all over the place. I am running to be your Johnson County District Attorney because the county has fallen behind. The district attorney needs to value and prioritize the values of transparency and accountability. We've got violent crime increasing in Johnson County over the last 4 years. Over the last 4 years, the performance of Mr. Howe's office and programs has dropped precipitously when it comes to jury trials. 69% in 2017, 63 or 69% in 2018, 53% in 2019. 47% of the trials that took place last year had the defendant walking away scot-free. 47% of the victims that had waited for justice got none. It's not a 12-year standard. It's what's happened. How is the office trending? And you can look at the stats. Mr. Howe says that these stats are so readily available. You just have to know who to call. Well, with me, that's not going to be a requirement. You can call the district attorney's office. You can go to the website and obtain these stats. You want to see trial stats? Just go to the Johnson County District Attorney's budget, and you can see the effectiveness measures. You can see the usage of diversion. He says, he's had a seat at the table, and I should have always been there. Well, first off, Mr. Howe's seat at the table is guaranteed by the ordinances and rules that control CJAC. He's obligated to be there or send someone in his stead. Secondly, while he's been in meetings that he brags about, I've been out in the public. I'm the first diverse candidate to run for this office. I've spoken at marches and rallies. I speak to the Johnson County residents directly. I was a diversity scholar. I was president of the Bar Association. I have the endorsement of the Asian American Bar Association. I don't need meetings. I'm talking to the people directly. I'm listening to their issues. I'm asking you for your vote on November 3rd. I thank you so much for your time. I thank the NAACP and all of the hosts for putting this together. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And to close out, Mr. Howe.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and provide some information for voters. My job, a big part of my job is leadership. And when I say leadership, that means working with other agencies to come up with solutions. And the Criminal Justice Advisory Council is made up of the public. People, anybody can show up and be part of the Criminal Justice Advisory Council. And unlike what Mr. Thomas said, I was part of CJAC 7 or 8 years before I became district attorney. And I felt so strongly about elder abuse and providing assistance to those in need that I was on a subgroup as part of CJAC. And I think it's important to understand that instead of deminimizing the work that CJAC does, is instead embrace it and understand that through that work, through that collaboration of all these agencies, we have seen some amazing successes for my office and programs that we've implemented and programs that we've implemented throughout the criminal justice system. We had the first Veterans Treatment Court in the state of Kansas. We're an innovator county because of the work that we've done on co-responders, putting mental health workers into law enforcement agencies to reduce the mentally ill being incarcerated. We also are expanding the work release center in Johnson County to help give some assistance in job training to individuals so it breaks that recidivism. This is work that we've done in the CJAC group. And we've done some amazing work, and is the reason why other places in the country come to Johnson County to see how it's done. We're leaders. And you know what? We've done some amazing things. And during my time as Johnson County District Attorney, even though we've added 70,000 people to our population, we've reduced the crime rate. And that doesn't happen by accident, ladies and gentlemen. That happens because of the hard work that myself and my staff and other members of the Criminal Justice Council have put towards keeping Johnson County a great place to live. In conclusion, I asked in the last 12 years, have you felt safe in your homes, your communities, your parks, your work? And if you have, then you have to ask yourself, why did that happen? And that's because of the work that I have done leading my agency and the other criminal justice agencies in this county. And that's why I think I've earned the right to have your vote come election day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, thank you both for being with us today. I especially want to congratulate you all on being part of this process, and to thank you for your knowledge sharing today, your exemplary dedication to the people of Johnson County. And I think we'd be remiss without acknowledging the level of civility that we've had in today's discussion. So we appreciate that. I also want to point out that as we've heard time and again today, there have been many points of agreement, which has also been a nice thing to see, as well as a pointed acknowledgement of the efforts and quality police departments and law enforcement personnel that we have within our community here. And so I thank you all again for your remarks, for your education, and for your participation in this all important debate that hopefully has illuminated different issues and positions that will enable people to feel informed as they get to the polls this November. Again, we would not be here today without the involvement of and support and leadership of the Johnson County NAACP's Political Action Committee, as well as our presenting sponsors, which I will again name for you: the Johnson County Latino Leadership Network, Olathe Second Baptist Church, Shawnee Mission Unitarian Universalist Church, Omega Psi Phi, the Miller Dream Team, Advocacy and Awareness Group of Overland Park, Move On, More Squared of Johnson County United, Upsilon Rho Omega Chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City. As I began today, I reminded you all that this debate was being recorded, and we are happy to have that in perpetuity on the climate page of YouTube, so you'll be able to see that moving forward. And last but not least, I certainly want to thank someone who's been working behind the scenes, and that is Bob Grove. He makes all of this happen virtually for us through his coordination of the Zoom platform and helping us with all of the technical skills that have led to a professional presentation today. So thank you, Bob, for all that you do. And lastly, thank you to the candidates for being with us, incumbent Steve Howe and challenger Zach Thomas, for accepting this invitation and joining us today for our questions. Have a great afternoon, everyone.